interests are Content and Integrated Language Learning, CLIL, Language Assessment, Professional Development, and Blended Learning. Dr. Yeo is also the co-editor of the Regional Language Center Journal and has recently published a chapter on blended learning and journal articles on academic publishing, English medium instruction, online language assessment, and feedback literacy. This plenary session will take a look at the increasing popularity of English medium instruction and bilingual education, along with CLIL, which has gained wider attention internationally. Our speaker, Dr. Yeo, will delve deep into the exploration of CLIL, underscoring the essential role of content teachers in teaching academic language proficiency, followed by a justification for the explicit teaching of academic language proficiency by content teachers. Join me in putting your hands together and help me in welcoming Dr. Marie Yeo to the stage with a presentation very aptly titled CLIL, the 4Cs and Generative AI, Innovative Academic Language Learning. Dr. Yeo, the floor is all yours.
Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. I'm so happy to see all of you here. And I'd like to thank ELTC for bringing me all the way from Singapore. ELTC holds a very special place in my heart because some of my former bosses were from ELTC, and many of you here were my former students. I kind of feel I'm on a family visit instead of a work trip. So thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited to meet all of you math and science teachers. As an English teacher, I am in awe of maths teachers because I cannot count, and science teachers. So thank you so much for joining me today. You'll be interested to know that as EMI teachers, you're part of this global phenomenon. So all around the world, all around the region, many governments are moving towards EMI or bilingual forms of education. In fact, you'll see in these pictures, sorry, I need to see where I am. Do I use this? Yes, that's right. In fact, RELC has been involved in training EMI teachers for over 10 years. About 7 years ago, we were involved in a 2-year project with the Thai Ministry of Education to train science teachers. So you'll see, these are some pictures. You can see the teacher over there. He was teaching human biology, and you can see these are some of the students doing experiments. Recently, in July, we had 70 Taiwanese teachers coming to Singapore because Taiwan is moving towards bilingual education as well. And these teachers came to Singapore to attend a course in CLIL, C-L-I-L, Content and Language Integrated Learning. So some of you are probably thinking, she said EMI, she said CLIL. What's the difference between EMI and CLIL? In my presentation today, I'm going to cover these points. So first, I'd like to give a very brief overview of EMI and CLIL. And next, I'm going to talk about academic language proficiency, the academic language proficiency of your subjects, science and maths. Next, I'm going to share with you an internationally known model called the 4Cs, ABC, the 4Cs, and introduce a concept called the language triptych. Then, I'm going to share some ideas about how we can use ChatGPT. I'm sure everybody in this room has heard of ChatGPT. How we can use ChatGPT to write language objectives and identify academic language for content lessons. And I hope to have time for Q&A. I think the challenge for many speakers is we come and we share ideas, maybe based on being teacher educators, but actually we need to be challenged by content teachers who have to do it every day, to ask us questions about how to apply what we're talking about. So I truly, truly invite you to challenge me, because I feel that through this discussion, all of us will learn a lot. So please sit back, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. I'm going to try to make it practical as well. So, as I said, I'd like to talk a little bit about EMI, because we need to see how CLIL fits into EMI. Please take a moment to look at this. Now, as I read this, I'd like you to consider, based on this, are you teaching in an EMI situation? So here we have the definition of EMI. It is the use of English to teach academic subjects such as maths, science, or economics in English rather than in the student's mother tongue or dominant language. So, are you teaching maths or science in English, or will you be teaching maths or science in English? Yes? Now, for your students, for some of them or for all of them, is their mother tongue not English? Maybe their mother tongue could be Malay or Chinese or something like that. So based on that, I think most of you are teaching in an EMI context. Now, I don't know how you ended up teaching an EMI class. Some of you probably put your hand up and said, me, I want to do it. And some of you, maybe because your English is very good, they go, please do it. And some of you, I'm sure because you are brilliant math and science teachers, you've been chosen to do it. Other teachers around the region have told me that what happens when they are asked to teach in English, when they're asked to change from their mother tongue to English, is this. So this is what they do, like teacher A. My content lessons are exactly the same as before, except that now I speak English. Sometimes I use my L1 to translate difficult terms. So this is what many teachers do. But when schools ask teachers to teach EMI, schools have a different aspiration. They have a different idea. This is what the school hopes will happen. My lessons now include explicit teaching of the language of my subject. I also create opportunities for students to develop their academic language and communication skills. This is what the schools hope will happen. What the schools are hoping is actually what is called a CLIL approach. So CLIL is, remember, content and language integrated learning. And I'd like to share with you this idea of CLIL, because I think that CLIL is a very empowering idea. It is not English only. You see, it's called content and language integrated learning. It is not called content and English integrated learning. So please take a moment to look at this, and then we can look at some of the key ideas. All right, so if you look at this definition, please pay attention to the highlighted words. CLIL is a dual focus. So this is like your DLP, dual focus educational approach in which an additional language, we didn't say English, an additional language is used for learning and teaching of both content and language. There is focus not only on content, not only on language, and each is interwoven. So it's like today I wore the skirt. This is woven. I wanted to illustrate woven. You see, it works together to make something more beautiful. So when we combine content and language, we interweave it, it becomes more beautiful. So each is interwoven. Now this is important, even if the emphasis is greater on one or another at any given time. So sometimes when you're teaching content, you're focusing on the content. And sometimes, a little bit of the time, you're focusing on the language, but the idea is that you focus on both. So I'd really like to sum up the first part of my presentation. I think the main takeaway that I hope you get from this, sorry, I need to move this on, is that when we're teaching maths and science using a CLIL approach, it's not just about teaching in the same way and just using L1. It's actually about using a content and language integrated learning approach. And we'll be talking a little bit more about how we can do that later. Now, most of you are thinking, these teacher educators, they don't know what's happening in the classroom. You're probably thinking, my job is to teach the knowledge and skills related to my subject. It's the English language teacher's job to teach English. And of course, I absolutely understand, all of you are thinking, I already have so much to cover. I don't even have enough time to finish my textbook. No time to finish my curriculum. How can you expect me to teach the language as well? Now, the reason that content teachers, you guys are unique, you guys are special, and you guys are the only ones who can teach academic language of your subject is because each academic subject has its own special language. Chadwick calls this cognitive academic language proficiency. So if we take a moment to look at this, please again focus on the words in yellow. So cognitive academic language proficiency, this is the academic language of your lesson, science or maths. Now, it's the language that students need to help them to learn the content, but more important than that, it's the language that will help them to demonstrate their learning. So I'll give you some examples later of what happens when students use everyday language to answer questions instead of the correct scientific language. The research has shown it actually affects their scores. Even if they understand the concept, but they cannot use the terminology, you're going to penalize them, right? So that's why we need to teach CALP so that students can show their learning in a way that will help them to get the marks. Now, another definition of academic language is by the very famous Canadian bilingual educator named Jim Cummings. Please take a minute to look at this. So according to Cummings, academic language proficiency is different from general language proficiency. And academic language proficiency is the extent to which your students have access to and command of the kind of oral and written academic registers of schooling. This means the language of schooling. School language and home language are very different. And just because students may be able to speak English well in the canteen, on the playground, when they talk about movies, it doesn't mean that they will be able to use academic English well. Sorry, can I have a time check? So could you let me know when I have about like half an hour left? Because I really want to make sure there's time for questions, because I think that's really important that you challenge me. Now, let's start with the language of science. I had to do a lot of reading, so science teachers, please forgive me. I'll try to explain this as well as I can. There's been a lot of research on the language of science, especially the language-related errors that students make when they're learning science in English. So I'd like to share with you the report of a project done in Singapore. It was a 2-year project. It was done with secondary school science students, and it was commissioned by the National Institute of Education. And I decided to share this with you because the backgrounds of our students in Singapore and Malaysia is quite similar. So instead of sharing with you a study from Europe, I thought this would be more relevant. So this study looked at how science teachers adapted their lessons to deal with language-related demands of science. And my colleague, you can see her picture, Ms. Pavitra Raja, she was one of the researchers. I'd really like to acknowledge her help in giving me these examples. There are lots of findings, but the ones that I'd like to share with you are these. Firstly, the researchers found that students, when they answered test questions, assignment questions, they would use general everyday language instead of specific academic terminology, and this cost them marks. Secondly, they also found that because some of the students didn't have high levels of language proficiency, they would write very short answers because they had to answer in English. So let me give you some examples. So science teachers, this one is especially for you. Don't worry, maths teachers, I've got something coming up for you too. So for science teachers, in one of the test questions, they were learning about arteries, and students had to describe what was happening. So you can see, the teacher wanted the student to say, that is a narrow lumen. Is that the correct word? Lumen, okay. But many of the students wrote, this is a thin lumen. Now, if you think about it, actually the student understands because it's not wide, it's thin. The student understood the concept, but the student didn't write it in the correct academic language. Okay, now, English teachers in this room, people like me, if we were teaching this, would we distinguish between narrow and thin? Maybe some of us who have learned science might go, no, you cannot use the word thin. You must use the word narrow. But honestly, someone like me, it's like, yes, yeah, it's correct. Good job. I wouldn't know how to correct it. But you science teachers, you would know. No, please write narrow because that's the correct terminology. Let me give you another example. So this is another example from the same study about valves. So what the teacher wants is for the students to write, valves prevent backflow of blood. But some of the students, if their English is not very good, they don't write long, complete answers, they actually write as though they are speaking. So this student wrote, valves prevent backflow. And then the teacher said, of what? Now, actually, I'm sure the student knew it was blood because they're talking about, the arteries. But the student didn't realize if I want to get the mark, I need to write valves prevent backflow of what? In fact, this structure, something of something, is a very common structure in science. But we English teachers, would we know it? I mean, this is perfectly right grammatically. Valves prevent subject, verb, backflow. So again, this is why only content teachers like yourself are equipped to teach the academic language of the subject, because English teachers don't have enough content knowledge. Okay, now let's move on to math. This one is a big challenge for me. I may have to refer to my notes. I think it's time to give you a bit of humor because you guys are such a great audience. So this is a typical math question. Now, in the language of maths, most of the research suggests that the problem is not writing the answers, because in math, when students write answers, usually it's numbers or something. In maths, students have problems with what we call word problems. So typically, what is the answer? Maths teachers? I won't ask any English teachers. It might be a bit scary for us. Okay, but, this is what a very cheeky student did. Actually, excuse me, it's correct. Yeah, English is correct because English means locate. I located it, teacher, give me a full mark. But in maths, find has a different meaning. I think find here means what is the length of X. That's a joke, but it's not a joke as well. Let me give you some serious examples. This is from a study that was done in America involving Spanish-speaking students. So let me read it out. Okay, don't take out your calculators. On Saturday, 203 children came to the swimming pool. On Sunday, 123 children came. How many more children came to the pool on Saturday than on Sunday? Very easy, right? Of course, the answer is 203 minus 128 equals to 75. But do you know what happened? Many students in the study came up with this answer. Okay, I want to stop for a moment. Any idea why? Okay, you just think about it. Yeah, you guys are, because they saw the word more. Yeah, maybe they saw the word more. That's a good idea. And during exam, students are absolutely in a panic. They're like, oh, more, add. Absolutely. So, during the research, after the students wrote the answer, the researchers went and spoke to the students and said, how did you get this answer? It turns out they mistook the word then, T-H-A-N, for then, T-H-E-N. So if you say then, it's a comparative, so you're going to subtract. But if you say then, it's addition. So they added it up together. I think, this example shows that I don't think it's addition problem. I don't think it's a subtraction problem. It's a language-related problem. And quite often, when students make mistakes, unless teachers have the opportunity to ask them, how did you get this answer? We just assume the student doesn't know how to add. The student doesn't know how to subtract. Okay, I have one more example from maths. This one, I also had to ask my husband and my son to check that it's correct because my maths isn't very good. Problems with prepositions. What is 6 divided by 12? What is 6 divided into 12? I can see a look of horror on some English teachers' faces. Yeah, all the English teachers are like, maths teachers, is it the same or different, this question? Sama-sama? Okay, very, very interesting. So, what is 6 divided by 12? Is asking you how many times can 12 fit into 6? 6 divided by 12 is 0.5 or half. What is 6 divided into 12? How many times can 6 fit into 12? It's actually 12 divided by 6 equals to 2. I see a look of absolute horror on some English teacher's face. So these were Spanish-speaking students who were learning maths in an American primary school. And the teacher is happily speaking, 6 divided by 12, 6 divided into 12, expecting that the students knew exactly what was meant. But actually, the students didn't. Can you believe that a little preposition can cause so much trouble? So again, I'd like to reiterate that we English teachers, even though we have the heart, the will, the desire, the hope to help you, may not have the ability to help you. And this is why I completely agree with what Puan Farah said. I think content and language teachers need to work together so that we can help the students. Okay, sorry, can I have a time check? So how many more minutes have I got left? Ooh, that's not a lot of time. Okay, let me go to the next slide. All right, so I'm doing the same as Puan Farah. I'd like you to do a self-check activity, but I won't ask you to answer aloud. This is just to recap. Okay, so EMI content lessons are the same as L1 content lessons, except that the teacher sometimes translates into English. True or false? False. It's not just translating. You need to use a different approach. Number 2, in a CLIL lesson, the content teacher focuses only on the knowledge and skills related to the content. True or false? False, yes. And content teachers need to teach general language proficiency. You need to teach academic language proficiency. Fantastic. All right, so now I'd like to move to the next part. So we've been saying that content teachers need to use a CLIL approach. I'd like to share with you a well-known CLIL approach. It is called the 4Cs, ABC, Cs. So it includes 4 ideas: content, cognition, culture, and communication. I'm going to go over the first 3 quite quickly. If you Google 4Cs CLIL, you will find many, many, many examples. but I want to focus on communication. I'm just being told that if I go over time, it's okay. So my heart can stop beating so fast. Because I'm like, oh no, how am I going to do this? Thank you so much, Terry. So let me go back to this. This 4Cs model was popularized by someone called CLIL, and she is currently at the University of Edinburgh. The 4Cs is a well-known model. It's used in South America, Japan, Thailand, Taiwan. So I'd also like to share it with you, and you can tell me whether you think it's appropriate. So the idea is that in any lesson, when we teach the 4Cs, we integrate these ideas. Content is straightforward. It is your topic. Whether you're teaching photosynthesis or whether you're teaching how to calculate hypotenuse, that's your topic, content. So we call it the knowledge, skills, and understanding of your subject. Cognition, of course you know, is about engaging in higher order thinking. So when we teach content, we hope it's not just to get students to remember and understand. We hope that they can apply, they can analyze, they can evaluate, they can create. That's cognition. Now, culture has a very special meaning in CLIL. It's not about the difference between one country and another country's culture. Culture in CLIL means that when we teach the content, we use it to help the students to gain more understanding about their own cultures and other cultures, to make connections with real life and with the community and the world. So when Puan Farah talked about how this dual language program aspired to help the students to be more globally competitive, the idea of culture is that when they learn the content, they learn it in a way that will help them to understand how the content fits beyond their own context, beyond their own classroom, beyond their own culture, beyond their own country. Now, the last C, which I would like to focus on, is communication. Communication is about the academic language and the classroom interactional language. So interactional language is the language that the students use when they're learning. I'll tell you more about this in a minute. CLIL calls this the language of learning, the language for learning, and the language through learning. Oh, today we have a lot of prepositions, huh? The language of learning, the language for learning, and the language through learning. And this is called the language triptych. I want to tell you what a triptych is. Maybe when you go to a museum, you sometimes see paintings that have 3 parts, 3 panels. So that's actually a triptych. So the idea of the language triptych is that students need the language of learning. This is very straightforward. For most of you, it is the language that they need to learn and demonstrate understanding of the content. Mainly it's your vocabulary, your key terminology. But it's also about grammar structures. Because, for example, science students may need to use passive structures. Science students, when they write a lab report, they need to use imperative structures. So it's about grammar structures. And the language of learning is also about text types. So text types, for example, in science, when students write a lab report, there is a certain format. It's not like a narrative story. It's not once upon a time. It will be first, open the, I don't know what, or next, add 3 drops of chlorine. This is a very strict text type. And in maths, when students have to use the structure, if X is this, then blah, 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 they cannot say, let us suppose that X is this. Then Y could be this. They have to use very strict sentence structures. And I'm not sure that English teachers can teach this. So let's stop for a minute. The language of learning. Okay, could you please just take a minute to think about in your subject, think of the last lesson you taught. What kind of terminology, what kind of grammar structures, what kind of text types? Okay, I'm sorry, I actually need to have a bit of water because my voice is leaving me. Let me just grab my water. Right, next, we have the language for learning. Language for learning is the kind of language that the students need in class in order to learn in English. So for example, if they want to ask you questions, do students have the language in English to ask you what, who, where, when, how? And if they need clarification from you, do they have the language to say, oh, teacher, I didn't understand this. Can you explain more about this? If they have to ask questions in English, it's not certain that students have the language for that. Now, language for learning is also the language when they do group work. When you ask students to do group work, actually, a lot of students will use their L1. And that's okay too. But if you want them to do group work in English, you can't assume that they have the language for it. Because when students do discussions in English, they need to agree, they need to disagree, they need to ask for clarification, they need to know if someone explains something and the others don't understand, they need to paraphrase. So this is called the language for learning. It's the language in the class to ask, answer questions. It's the language for group work. Okay. Last idea, the language through learning. The language through learning is something you cannot plan before class. This is the language that happens when students ask you questions in class, and then you have a golden opportunity to help to correct their language. So perhaps if the student mispronounces something, then at that moment, you will help the student to pronounce it correctly. If the student gives you the answer in everyday language, at that moment, you can help the student to paraphrase it. The language through learning, these are golden opportunities. But a lot of the time, because we have to finish our lesson plan, like me, I have to get to my next slide, it's like ignore. So language of learning, I'm sure all of you already do it. Language for learning, and then language through learning. Now, don't worry, I don't want you to look at the small words. But I just want to tell you that you can Google now while I'm talking. If you look up 4Cs lesson plan, you will find hundreds of lesson plans in all subjects using the 4Cs and the language triptych, because this model has been used successfully around the world for 10 to 15 years. So I just want to show you over here, just look, you can see content. You don't have to see what the content is. It's about renewable and non-renewable energies. You can see cognition, communication, culture, and then we have the language of learning, the language for learning, and the language through learning. So if you're interested, you can Google and you can see lots of lesson plans. That was for science. Let's look at maths. So again, please don't worry that you cannot see the words. But I just want to show you, in this CLIL lesson plan, there's content. So this is about measurements, metric and imperial. Cognition, culture, communication, language of learning, language for learning, and then language through learning. So in a presentation like this, it's too much for me to explain all of it in depth, but I just wanted to introduce you to this 4Cs framework because it is an internationally known framework. Okay, it's about time for me to move to the last part of my presentation. I'm sure you're very happy to hear that. But before we do that, again, a recap. Which C is about thinking levels? Cognition. Which C is about relating the content to the real world? Culture. Which C is about the topic of your lesson? And the last C? Oh, gold star, gold star. Well done, everybody. And what are the missing prepositions? Language of learning, language for learning, and language through learning. Okay, everybody, give yourselves a hand. Puan Farah, we have a wonderful audience in the house today. Thank you so much for your attention. So now I'd like to move to the last part of my presentation. In many CLIL lesson plans, so if you want to make a start in content and language integrated learning, I'll just suggest 2 practical things you could consider doing. One thing is to have language objectives in your content lessons. If you look on the internet, a lot of the CLIL content lessons have language objectives. So in order to decide what language objectives, of course you can work alongside the English language teachers because each topic, there will be specific features of the language that go alongside. And this is where collaboration with English language teachers will help. But in this modern world, as Puan Farah said, we can leverage technology. So we can also use generative AI, like ChatGPT, to help us to identify language objectives and the language of learning. Because most of you are thinking, I'm not an English teacher, I've never studied applied linguistics, how can I identify objectives related to my lesson? So let me give you some examples. I was working with the Taiwanese teachers I told you about, and we decided to ask our new friend, ChatGPT. Our old friend is Dr. Google, and our new friend is ChatGPT to help us. And we found that ChatGPT can help teachers to identify language objectives that are directly related to your content. ChatGPT can help you to list the key language of learning, the vocabulary, the structures, the text types, and ChatGPT can give you suggestions of activities to integrate it in a lesson. So I wanted to make this really relevant for you, so I looked at some Malaysian textbooks. I managed to get this off the internet. I don't know, are you still using this textbook for science? Okay, so it's familiar to you, I'm glad. I looked through the textbook, and there was one unit, make a sequence to show the pathway of impulses in voluntary and involuntary actions. Okay, maybe some of you are familiar because you taught this. So what I did was I went into ChatGPT and I wrote a prompt. My prompt was, The lesson objectives is for students to, and then I typed the lesson objective. My instruction to ChatGPT was, suggest 3 language objectives for this lesson, 1 related to vocabulary, 1 related to grammar structures, and 1 related to text types. Bang! 10 seconds later, ChatGPT came up with this. Okay, again, you don't have to read it. It's very small, but you can see it gave me key terminology. Actually, most science teachers, you know the key terminology. It's listed in your textbooks. But when I scanned the textbooks, there weren't so many grammar structures. In fact, there were not grammar structures to teach. So ChatGPT can help us to identify grammar structures related to that topic. Now, in this particular case, ChatGPT said, teach passives, because students need to write something like the neuron, sense, and impulse, but they actually need to change it to an impulse is sent by the neuron, and ChatGPT explained why this should be in the passive. ChatGPT said, this structure is good. It emphasizes the action, the movement of the impulse, rather than the doer, the neuron. So really, for science teachers, is it true that sometimes they will write in the passive? Yeah. But students may not know this. And so science teachers may need to teach them how to do it, and you can get ChatGPT to help you. Okay, finally, ChatGPT also suggested that when you're teaching this subject, the text type that students need to learn are flowcharts. If students draw flowcharts, they'll be able to explain the way that the neuron transmits. Now, after that, I was not satisfied. I thought, how to teach? So I said to ChatGPT, suggest 3 language activities that can be integrated into the lesson to teach these 3 language objectives. These should not take more than 10 minutes of a 40-minute lesson. You can say 5 minutes if you want. Bam! 10 seconds later, again, you don't have to read this. ChatGPT suggested vocab matching game, 3 minutes. Passive voice conversion race, 4 minutes. Peer sharing of flowcharts, 3 minutes. So as teachers, you can decide, I don't have 10 minutes, but maybe I will choose number 1. Maybe I'll choose number 2. So with ChatGPT, the Taiwanese teachers who used it gave me some feedback. They said, ChatGPT is useful for identifying the difference between academic language and everyday language. ChatGPT can also teach us new techniques like vocabulary games, to teach language that's related to the content. But what they said is that if you use ChatGPT, please be careful, because sometimes ChatGPT's response will be very long and complicated. But don't worry, because you are the person controlling ChatGPT. If that happens, you just write back and you go, please make this simpler. Please explain this in a way that a primary 6 student can understand, and bam, it does it. So that's pretty amazing. So it's actually time for me to recap my lesson, my presentation today. I'd like to summarize with these key points. When we're asked to teach our content subjects in English to students whose mother tongue is not English, it's EMI. And all of you have said you're teaching in an EMI situation. But EMI is not just about using the same approach, but sometimes translating. It's about using a content and language integrated learning approach. There are many different CLIL approaches, but the one that I shared with you today was called the 4Cs. Okay, impress me. What are the 4Cs? Content, culture, and communication. Wow, you guys are on fire today. And particularly with communication, the language triptych, the language of learning, for learning, and through learning. I've also shared with you that if you want to make a small start, at least you can set language objectives for the lesson. Even one is enough to start. And to go about doing this, of course, you can ask the English language teachers to collaborate with you, or in the meantime, you may ask ChatGPT, and then you can judge whether it fits, because you're the content experts. So I'd really like to, end this by, I want to reiterate Puan Farah's point about the importance of collaboration. I think today RELC and ELTC are collaborating by having me here. We've got content and language teachers. I also agree that change is hard. I've worked with EMI teachers for over 10 years. It's not easy. You guys are brave. You guys are brave, but what you're doing is very meaningful because it can really help future generations. So I really hope that we will all have the opportunity to continue to work together so that our students will be able to maintain their L1, to develop their L1, which was your first point, but at the same time, also develop their English using a content and language integrated learning approach. You guys have been an amazing audience. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you. Now it's time for you to challenge me with some questions. I think I need to drink some water to get ready. Please, really, if you have a question, any concerns, please allow me to join in your discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Mario. It has been indeed an informative session. Now, let's proceed with the Q&A session. We welcome any queries you may have. Just use the mic that we prepared for you.
Okay, I think I have to incentivize. Just give me a second. I brought some stuff from Singapore to incentivize questions. I have a pen from RELC, and here I have some aromatherapy oils. This is very good for teachers. Apparently it reduces stress. You rub it on your temples, it reduces stress. So if you ask a question, you get a gift from Singapore. You don't have to ask a question, you can make a comment as well.
Doctor, thank you very much for your enlightenment today. Maybe I need that, that's one.
No, you have to ask the question first.
Yeah.
You can't have the gift before asking.
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, it's a very great to be here, the lecture given here, Dr. Mary. Okay, firstly, I would like to know, as a science teacher, I would like to introduce myself, Anandan from PPD Seremban. As a teacher, we are looking into two ways. As a teacher itself, we are as a content expert and also about the language now. So when you're going for assessment, so which character we are supposed to play? Either as a language teacher or content. So is there any correlations been found? Any survey done on this matter? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and please receive my little souvenir. So the question was, in terms of assessment, when you look at the students' answers, do you use the eyes of a content teacher or do you use the eyes of a language teacher? Okay, I'm going to answer this by telling you about some international exams. They have the rubric for science teachers. So this is the International Baccalaureate. In the rubrics for content teachers, they have 5 levels. And in the first 3 levels, the students seem to be marked on the content. But to get the higher mark and the higher marks, it specifically says students must use key terminology and structures accurately. So, in a way, the assessment of your content and language are interwoven. For them to show a very high understanding of the content, they actually need to use the cognitive academic language proficiency, right? They have to use the terminology. So I guess I can answer your question by saying that it's both. Your eyes, once you become an EMI teacher using the CLIL approach, you don't distinguish content from language because you are looking at academic language. You're not taking away marks for grammar mistakes. You're not taking away marks for spelling mistakes. But if they don't use, they use thin instead of narrow, I think you may not give them full marks. Okay, so if you have any follow-up questions, you may ask me now or later. And other people, please feel free to share your thoughts as well. It's not just a one-way discussion, two-way discussion. It can be dialogic. I've got 2 more.
Okay, Dr. Marie, I have a question here. Okay. I bet that everyone here are parents. So, how can parents or caregivers support their children who are involved in CLIL program at school? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, this is a difficult and a little bit sensitive question. I want to answer it by sharing with you some research that was done in America about students who are learning content in English. So these are like the Spanish-speaking students that I was telling you about. In America, they're called ELLs, English Language Learners. And this study found that in the 4th grade, P1, P2, P3, P4, the students from lower income families, there was a slump in their performance. Because in P1, 2, and 3, teachers, you know, the students just need to show their understanding, sometimes in very fun ways by drawing. But by the time they get to P4, P5, and P6, actually, they have to start using the language of school. And they found that because at home, students from lower income families, some of their parents didn't have the money to buy like books for them. Some of the parents couldn't send them to tuition. And even some of the TV programs that they watched. You know, some of you, I'm sure you ask your children to watch National Geographic or Animal Planet, something like that. So they are actually getting exposure to the language of school. So my roundabout way of answering your question is that if parents and caregivers would like to support your students, maybe giving them exposure. You know, nowadays there's so much on social media. Instead of letting the students waste their time on TikTok or whatever else, it would be good to be able to identify, and schools can help, and curate, you know, certain programs, certain websites, good websites, where they can learn in an enjoyable way. There are lots of games as well. that can equip them with the kind of academic-like language that they need. You don't have to do it yourself. You can use resources around you to do it. And teachers, you know, if we want to equalize the playing field, we have to get involved because not all students can come from the same background. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. Maybe we can have one more question before we wrap up.
I have a question. I don't need a souvenir. Reserve that.
I think there's a lady here with a question as well.
Come.
Yeah.
Lady. Okay. As your former student, when I was pursuing my master's, so I need to ask you a question. As a language educator, I agree with a lot of things that you said. But my question is, there seems to be a demarcation between the responsibility of the language teacher to improve the language proficiency of the child. And when we talk about content for mathematics and science, of course, we need to rely on the subject matter expert. In a school environment, is it necessary or is it better to provide a language-rich environment to allow the students to perform better in dual language program? Or is it enough for the subject matter expert to cater for the content alone?
Thank you, thank you. You know, Terry always asks difficult questions when I was his lecturer as well. But those difficult questions are the questions that actually we need to ask. So he's saying, in a school, is it enough for like a language teacher to provide a language-rich environment so students will develop their general language proficiency, or is it enough for the content teacher to develop the academic language proficiency? I think those of us who have studied language, we know that language is like an iceberg, like the Titanic hit the iceberg. The students need to have a good base, and it will help them to improve their language. But there is that level of academic language proficiency that I quite believe only content teachers can teach. So again, collaboration is absolutely a must. Here's the danger of what will happen if we only develop students' academic language proficiency. The students will talk like books. Think about it. If we only teach them academic language of science and math, and the rest of the time they're using mother tongue, when they have to talk about math and science, they will talk like books. They will sound very academic. But actually, as a content teacher, we need to be able to use both everyday language and academic language. So when I'm explaining some of these concepts, I put the academic language in a slide, but then it's my job to explain it to you using everyday language. So maybe to answer Terry's question, you can see the relationship. If I only give you academic language, maybe the understanding is not clear enough. If I only give you everyday language, I'm shortchanging you because I'm not giving you the full meaning. But when I give you both content and language interwoven, wow, you have a deeper understanding. Thank you. I'm scared of Terry's questions. It's a good question.
Thank you, Dr. Mario, for taking the time to answer our participants' questions, as well as for presenting such an intriguing topic today. Your insights have been truly precious, and thank you once again.
Thank you very much, everyone.
With that, we have come to the end of our first plenary session. We hope you found this session enriching and inspiring.